A billionaire fugitive with pet tigers, golden AK-47s, and a fortune that rivals Pablo Escobar. This isn't a Netflix series, it's real life, and it belongs to El Chapo's eldest son, Iván Archivaldo Guzmán, aka El Chapito. Let's take an inside look at the billionaire lifestyle of one of the most feared drug kingpins. Born into narco royalty, Iván Archivaldo Guzmán Salazar was born into a dynasty built on cocaine roots, blood money, and the fear of the entire nation. His father, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, was the world's most notorious drug lord, and being the eldest son, Iván was expected to carry the crown. From the very beginning, life for him wasn't like other children of Mexico. While kids his age were worrying about soccer practice or sneaking candy, Iván's playground was cartel compounds and prison visiting rooms. He grew up in an atmosphere where violence and money weren't separate worlds, but part of the same conversation. Alongside his brothers Joaquín Jr., Ovidio, and Alfredo, he became known as Los Chapitos, or the Little Chapos. But there was nothing little about the life they were being prepared for. These kids were being trained, mentored, and molded to one day run the family empire. And that mentorship came not only from El Chapo himself, but also from Ismael El Mayo Zambada as well, the cartel's other mastermind. Imagine sitting in a classroom where the lesson of the day wasn't math equations, but how to smuggle shipments across borders, how to buy loyalty with bribes, and how to keep power through both charm and fear. These were the lessons Iván was learning from a young age. By the time he stepped into his teenage years, Iván had stopped just watching and had already started managing logistics, connecting with lieutenants, and understanding the darker side of leadership. He learned early that being a Guzmán wasn't just about wealth, it was about wearing an invisible crown that came with enemies, expectations, and endless danger. Baptism by fire, the 2016 kidnapping. All that training and preparation was put to the test one random night in 2016 when Iván was celebrating his birthday at a restaurant in Jalisco. It was supposed to be a night of champagne and laughter, but instead, the event turned into the most terrifying moment of his life. In a bold move, gunmen stormed the restaurant. But they weren't just random attackers looking for money. They were soldiers of the CJNG cartel, acting under the orders of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes El Mencho, one of Mexico's most ruthless drug lords and a sworn rival of the Guzmáns. Iván and his younger brother Alfredo were kidnapped in front of stunned partygoers, bundled out like trophies of war. The criminal underworld suddenly buzzed. Was this the end of El Chapo's bloodline? After all, El Chapo himself was behind bars by then and was apparently powerless. But as they say, appearances can be deceiving. Even in a cell, Chapo's reach was terrifying. Within hours, he sent messages to El Mencho's camp. The threat was brutal in its simplicity. Harm my sons, and your son dies next. El Mencho's heir was in custody, and the Guzmáns were willing to strike him down without hesitation. 4 days passed in the same tension, and then Iván and Alfredo were finally released unharmed. To the outside world, it looked like a miracle. But to the underworld, it was a declaration. Los Chapitos were untouchable, taking the throne. The following year, in 2017, El Chapo was extradited to the United States and sentenced to life in prison. The empire, once led by a single iron fist, was suddenly leaderless, and into that vacuum stepped the Chapitos with Iván at the helm. This was no ordinary inheritance. Running the Sinaloa cartel meant holding together an empire that stretched across continents, controlled billions in revenue, and was constantly under siege by rivals, law enforcement, and even former allies. Many thought the cartel would splinter and fall apart without its founder. Instead, Iván and his brothers pulled it back together. Iván emerged as the key decision-maker, often described as the plaza boss of Mazatlan. He controlled territories, supervised shipments, and commanded armies of gunmen. But he wasn't just holding the cartel together, he was reshaping it. Gone were the days when cocaine routes alone fueled the business. Under Iván's leadership, the cartel shifted gears, investing heavily in synthetic drugs like fentanyl. It was a cold, strategic move, one that recognized the changing landscape of the drug trade. And it worked. Within a few years, the Sinaloa cartel had not only survived the fall of its king, but had become richer and more dangerous than ever before. Iván wasn't just his father's son anymore. He was a boss in his own right, steering a criminal empire into a new, darker, and far more profitable era, the fentanyl empire. If there's one move that cemented Iván's reputation as more than just El Chapo's heir, it was his pivot to synthetics. While the old guard made fortunes on cocaine and marijuana, Iván saw the future in a little white pill fentanyl. Cheap to make, easy to smuggle, and lethally addictive. In the hills of rural Sinaloa, hidden behind farms and jungle cover, his labs multiplied like wildfire. These weren't amateur backrooms, they were industrial-scale operations, pumping out millions of counterfeit pills every year. The supply chain was smooth and global. Precursor chemicals shipped in from China and India, cooked down in Mexico, then disguised, packaged, and funneled across the border into United States streets. The impact? Catastrophic. The DEA estimates millions of doses every month, with nearly 200 Americans dying daily from fentanyl overdoses. To Washington, Los Chapitos didn't just become another cartel faction, they became the pioneers of the deadliest drug crisis in modern history. And Iván? He treated it like a business empire. Fentanyl was the cash cow, but distribution reached far beyond the United States. Their network spanned continents, sourcing from Asia, moving through Mexico, and even reaching Europe. This wasn't a street gang operation anymore. It was a supply chain rivaling Big Pharma, except instead of pharmacies, the retailers were smugglers and dealers. Billions flowed in. Like it or not, Iván Archivaldo Guzmán had transformed the Sinaloa cartel into something new, less like a criminal syndicate and more like a multinational corporation, only with higher profit margins and bloodier consequences. The billion-dollar fortune. Money has always been the bloodstream of cartels, but Iván Archivaldo's fortune takes it into another stratosphere. Conservative estimates place his net worth around $7 billion, while the higher end pushes close to $90 billion. That range alone tells you how shadowy his empire is, because when your business model revolves around clandestine labs, offshore accounts, and shell corporations stretching from Mazatlan to Dubai, it's not exactly something you can file neatly in a Forbes report. For perspective, Pablo Escobar, the so-called king of cocaine, topped out around $30 billion. El Chapo himself, Iván's father, was said to be worth about $14 billion. If Iván's high-end figure is even remotely accurate, he hasn't just stepped into their shoes, he's left them in the dust. And here's the kicker. This isn't buy a few yachts and some vacation homes money. This is the kind of fortune that bends reality. It buys politicians who rewrite laws, police chiefs who look the other way, and judges who suddenly forget what evidence they were presented. It funds private armies of sicarios who don't just follow orders, they worship loyalty to the Chapitos brand like it's religion. The empire itself looks less like a cartel and more like a multinational corporation. Revenues rivaling Fortune 500 companies flow through a dizzying network of shell companies, front businesses, and real estate ventures. One year, it's luxury resorts in Mazatlan. The next, it's cosmetic brands and hotel chains tied back to cartel money. Every dollar that enters dirty gets washed and re-emerges dressed in a suit, ready to buy influence on a global scale. So, is Iván just a narco kingpin? Or is he a billionaire tycoon who happens to trade in fentanyl instead of tech stocks? The truth is, he's both, and that's what makes him so dangerous. His wealth isn't just about luxury, it's about control. The kind of control that makes borders irrelevant and laws negotiable. The narco luxury lifestyle. Now let's be real, all those billions don't just sit in offshore accounts. Iván knows how to spend, and he spends like a man determined to make headlines without ever giving an interview. His idea of flexing? A gold-plated AK-47 with his initials carved in, or a pistol engraved with symbols straight out of World War II. They're not just weapons, they're conversation starters. The kind you bring out when you want the world to know exactly who you are. And that's just the start. His garage looks like a billionaire's version of Fast and Furious. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bugattis, all lined up next to private Gulfstream jets waiting on standby. Then there are the pets, not the kind you'd expect in a billionaire's mansion, but tigers, lions, and exotic animals lounging casually around his estates. Oh, and yes, there's a real-life Batmobile in his collection. Because why just play the villain when you can live like one? Leaked photos and videos often through social media give us those fleeting glimpses of his world. Iván dripping in Richard Mille watches, dressed in top-tier designer fashion, surrounded by women, friends, and more champagne than most nightclubs stock in a month. The parties are the stuff of legend, equal parts Hollywood after-party and narco fantasy camp. But here's the twist. None of this extravagance is purely about pleasure. It's strategy. Every outrageous display, every golden gun, every tiger on a leash is carefully curated theater. It's a message to rivals. Cross me and you're not just taking on a man, you're taking on an empire wrapped in myth. It's also a message to followers. This is the dream, the lifestyle, the reward for loyalty. In the narco world, fear and respect are currencies, and Iván spends them both like a billionaire spraying champagne at a nightclub, loud, flashy, unforgettable. His luxury isn't just excess, it's weaponized image-making, proof that El Chapito isn't hiding in the shadows. He's thriving, and he wants everyone to see it. Music and the money laundering connection. Now, here's where Iván Archivaldo's story takes a twist most crime bosses never even thought of. He literally hires musicians to sing his legend into existence. We're talking about corridos, those Mexican folk ballads that have always told tales of rebels, heroes, and, in modern times, narcos. But Iván doesn't just wait for his story to be sung, he commissions it. Artists like Peso Pluma, Fuerza Regida, and Natanael Cano have allegedly pocketed fat stacks to create songs glorifying him, his brothers, and their empire. One of the biggest examples? JGL, a not-so-subtle anthem tied to the Chapitos. It racked up hundreds of millions of views online, with fans singing along without realizing they were basically chanting a cartel PR campaign. For Iván, music is more than entertainment, it's branding. Every verse, every viral hook, is another layer to the myth of El Chapito, part narco, part pop culture icon. But behind the theatrics of music and social media, there's the quieter, dirtier work, laundering billions. And in this arena, the Chapitos play the game like seasoned Wall Street bankers. Mazatlan, the Sinaloa coast, and tourist hubs are littered with businesses tied to cartel, cash hotels, spas, beauty clinics, even luxury real estate developments. Dirty money pays for construction, land, materials, and labor, and then comes out squeaky clean through property sales, rentals, and resorts. This dual-life flashy corridors and deep financial networks is what makes Iván so slippery. On the surface, he's a figure of excess, a man with tigers, jets, and viral songs. But behind the curtain, he's a meticulous operator, embedding himself into legitimate markets. It's not just narco culture anymore, it's narco-capitalism. Fugitive billionaire, the endgame. For all the gold-plated guns and Batmobiles, there's one thing Iván can't buy: freedom from the hunt. Today, he's one of the world's most wanted men, carrying a $10 million United States bounty on his head. Federal indictments name him in drug trafficking, conspiracy, even narco-terrorism. The Sinaloa cartel itself is now classified by some as a foreign terrorist organization, putting him in the same category as groups like Hezbollah. And yet, Iván remains untouchable. Intelligence reports suggest he moves between fortified ranches, jungle hideouts, and heavily guarded compounds, never sleeping in the same bed for long. His inner circle is tight, his security trained and loyal. To capture him would mean storming an army. But what makes his story chilling is the duality. On one hand, Iván is this larger-than-life billionaire who flaunts wealth, who treats luxury as a stage and himself as the star. On the other, he's a phantom, a man who can vanish into the mountains of Sinaloa and leave law enforcement grasping at shadows. And the real question isn't just when or if he'll be caught, it's what happens to the empire if he ever island. The Chapitos built a machine that runs on billions, on blood, and on fear. Even with one brother in prison and others hunted, the brand survives, the fortune grows, and the fentanyl flows. For now, Iván Archivaldo Guzmán sits at the crossroads of myth and menace, a billionaire fugitive who turned his father's bloody legacy into a global empire. And until the day he falls, El Chapito remains both a kingpin and a legend, ruling from the shadows while the world watches.